Good morning. Today is Monday, March 23rd. So I did this video for you all on today just to help you out as you go through the lessons with students. And so I did a video, I have pictures, I did voiceovers pretty much for every subject that we will cover on today. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the first lesson of the day is Bible. And so usually when we come in, the first thing we do is we pray, and then we will go over the catechisms, which I will send a picture of those if you wanted to practice those at home. We practice our memory scripture of the week. We review it, we discuss it, and we talk about what the scripture means. We review our books of the Bible. Students do know all 66 books, and so this is really important for them to know, especially when it comes to finding scriptures, knowing how to identify and find certain books of the Bible. So if I say find Jeremiah, they'll know what Jeremiah is by Isaiah and Lamentations. So anyway, so if you do want to do all of that, you are free to do that just to kind of enhance the Bible lesson. We also do a sword drill where we practice finding scriptures. So I will usually give them a scripture. If I'll say find Psalms 94, and so they'll go through it and they'll find it and then they read it. So that is something fun to do at home for students as well. So after we complete all these different things before we get into our lesson, we go into our Bible lesson. So this week we are doing, today in particular, talking about Jesus and the 10 lepers, and Jesus and he healed the man of leprosy. And so in the Bible, leprosy was a disease that people would have. It was a contagious disease. It was a terrible disease. You did not want to catch leprosy. Lepers usually had to go and live alone by themselves in seclusion. It was just a sad life that they lived. But thank God that we have Jesus who can cure us and heal us from any type of disease, any type of sickness, and that though man may say that we cannot be healed, Jesus will come and heal us. And so that is what the lesson is on today. So you could go ahead and read the lessons. So one is in Matthew and one is in Luke. Talk about it and discuss it. I'm sure students will enjoy discussing the Word of God. After Bible, we move on to writing. This is a picture of the writing book that students do their lessons in. So today's page is on page 126, and it's called a narration exercise. So what I usually do for this lesson is I will read a story to students, and then after we read it, they write in between 3 to 5 sentences the core of the story. So they tell me what was the issue in the story, how did it get resolved. But they do that in 3 to 5 sentences. So sometimes they try to do it in 1 or 2 sentences, but there is no way you could explain a story in such short amount of sentences. So just make sure that as they retell you the story, that they are telling you completely and fully what went on in the story. So this week's story is called Moominland Midwinter by Tove Jennison. So it's a series of books about moomins, which are little tiny creatures who live together in little villages deep inside the countryside. So on the next slide, I will have a picture of the page that they will write their narration on, and I'll read the story as well. So here's the story. Inside the house was warm and cozy. Heaps of peat were quietly smoldering in the central heating stove down in the cellar. The moon looked in sometimes at the drawing room window, lighting on the white winter covers of the chairs and on the cut glass chandelier in its white gauze bag. And in the drawing room also, grouped together around the biggest porcelain stove of the house, was the Moomin family, lay sleeping in their long winter sleep. They always slept from November to April because such was the custom of their forefathers, and Moomins stick to tradition. They all had a good meal of pine needles in their stomach, just as their ancestors used to have, and beside their bed, each had hopefully laid out everything likely to be needed in early spring: spades, burning glasses, and films, wind gauges, and the like. The silence was deep and expectant. Every now and then, somebody sighed and curled deeper down under the quilt. The streak of moonlight wandered from rocking chair to drawing room table, crawled over the brass knobs of the bed in, and shone straight in Moomin Troll's face. And now something happened that had never happened before, not since the first Moomin took to his hibernating den. Moomin Troll awoke and found that he couldn't go back to sleep again. He looked at the moonlight and the ice ferns on the window. He listened to the humming of the stove in the cellar and felt more and more awake and astonished. Finally, he rose and padded over to Moomin Mama's bed. He pulled at her ear very cautiously, but she didn't wake. She just curled into an uninterested ball. If not even Mother wakes up, it's no use trying the others, Moomin Troll thought, and went along by himself on a round through the unfamiliar and mysterious house. All the clocks had stopped ages ago, and a fine coat of dust covered everything. On the drawing room table still stood the soup tureen with pine needles left over from November, and inside its gauze dress, the cut glass chandelier was softly jiggling to itself. So after I read this story, we then go through a series of questions to help students out as they prepare to write their narration. So first question is, do you remember where the central heating stove was? The answer, it was down in the cellar. Next question, in the drawing room, the chairs were covered up for winter. What was the chandelier covered in? Answer, it was covered with a white gauze bag. What room were the Moomins sleeping in? The answer is they were sleeping in the drawing room. Between what 2 months did the Moomins sleep? Answer, they slept from November to April. What did they eat before they went to sleep? Answer, they ate pine needles. What strange thing did Moomin Troll do? Answer, he woke up. Moomin Troll went through the house looking at everything in it. What did he notice about the clocks? The clocks had stopped. What had covered everything in the house? Answer, there was dust all over everything. Last question, what was still inside the soup kettle on the table? Answer, there were still pine needles in it. So parents, it's important that they know the answers to these questions. If you went through them and they did not know the answers, I highly suggest that you go back and look over this, listen to the story again so that they can answer these questions thoroughly. So this is mostly a listening exercise, knowing how to listen and focus on the story to be able to answer the questions. So what they do now is in 2 or 3 sentences, they need to tell me what the Moomin Troll's house was like in the middle of the winter. So whenever they write, make sure that they are focusing on the question. The question says in 2 to 3 sentences, today is 2 to 3, they can do more than 3, that's fine. It says, tell me what Moomin Troll's house was like in the middle of the winter. So that was really the first part of the story. So if you need to go back and listen, do that. And so that's what they have to write out on that paper. After we finish writing, we move on to reading. So this is the reading book. I'm sure you're familiar with it from last week, Pats of Gold. So the only thing this week that will be in addition to reading is that we will have a test on that this week. Last week, I did not give a reading test, but we will have one on this week. It will be on Thursday. I will send tests on the Thursday morning. And so the reading test will be included in there as well. So students just kind of go through their book in class. Usually I make them read it twice. We read it one time together and then they'll read it on their own in silence. It's important that you question them as they go through the story to make sure that they are comprehending the story and that they understand what they are reading. Also reviewing the story every day. So what they read on Monday, review it on Tuesday and Wednesday. What they read on Tuesday, review it on Wednesday, and so on and so forth. This will help them as they prepare to take their test on Thursday. Next lesson we will move on to is phonics. It does say and language on there, but this is mainly phonics. Language is a separate lesson. So this week in phonics and language, they will be introduced to adjectives, which students already do know, but it's just a review, identifying it in sentences, writing it in sentences. So today's lesson is lesson 126, which will be pages 251 and 252 in their workbook. So before you get into the lesson, we usually do a little bit of chart review, and sometimes we do board work before we get into the actual lesson and before we get into the workbook. it's good to kind of go over this with students just so that they can be reminded of things that we've learned already. So I will put pictures of the phonics charts. It will be chart 10, chart 11, and chart 12. They do know the sounds to these charts, so it shouldn't be anything difficult for them. But I also have the YouTube links of the charts. If you want me to send them to you, go ahead and send me a remind message, and I could get those links to you. So after you review the phonics chart, this morning when I sent my email, I attached a word list that has a bunch of words that contain the sounds from charts 10, 11, and 12. So usually in class, I'll have these words on the board and students go to the board and they read the words to me. It's really good to do this because it helps them to stay familiar with the sounds, and when they see a word, to know how to identify the sounds in the word. That helps them to read easier and faster. So after you go through the charts, you could go through this word list. It'll be a good good idea to time them every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and to compare. So say if today it takes them like 2 minutes, it's just an idea. I'm not sure it'll take that long, but it's just if it takes them 2 minutes to get through it on today, and then you compare it to Thursday where they should be down to like a minute, maybe even less than a minute getting through the words. So this helps them to get familiar with words, and it also helps speed up their reading. So you could go through that word list every day after you complete the phonics charts, Monday through Thursday. So after you finish going through the charts and going through the word list, you could go ahead and work in the workbook page that they should be able to complete. It is page 251 and 252. So next, after we do phonics and language, we move on to spelling. So this week we are on list 25. I have a picture of the spelling list up here. So there's a total of 17 spelling words, and then they have 3 vocabulary words, which makes 20. And then I have an additional 5 Greek and Latin words that will be in the next slide that I add on to their original spelling list. These are the Latin words that students have on this week. So the first one is novus. The V is actually silent, and it means new. A word that we get from the word novus would be novel. Okay, next one is ordo, which means row, array. A word that we get from ordo would be order. Next one is saeculum, which means age, century. A word that we get from saeculum would be secular. Next one is primus, which means first. A word we get from primus would be primary. And the next one is secundus, which means second. And a word we get from secundus would be second or secondary. So I don't require students to tell me words that we can make from those Latin words. I just like them to know, because I want them to know that learning these Greek and Latin root words, we turn them into words that we actually use today. So I don't require them to know the words that we can make. If you want to, that's fine. But all I need them to know is how to spell the word and what it means. So after we complete spelling, we move on to math. Today's lesson is lesson 126. So today's lesson is on locating and graphing points on a coordinate graph. So students will learn how to locate and find points on a graph, which will be in the next slide. I'll kind of teach that to them, how to identify and how to find them. So there's 3 pages today. You have the facts page, which will be 126, which is the multiplication, multiplying times 4. And then they'll have a graphing page, which will be lesson worksheet 126. And then they'll have a work page, guided class practice, lesson 126A. So all 3 of those pages should be completed on today. After you go through the lesson, then you could work on the pages. So this is what a coordinate graph looks like. So you have numbers on the side, then you have numbers on the bottom. And then you have points. And so we'll get to what all of that is. So first thing first is that you have 2 axes or 2 lines of a graph. So you have the Y side, which will be your vertical side. And then you have the X side, which is your horizontal side. So you will learn how to locate points on this coordinate graph. So each of these points has a special address that tells us where it is located on the graph. Just like your house has an address that tells people where your house is located on the street. So if I point to 0, 0, first thing you do is always start on the X side, which is the bottom, and then you work your way up to find the Y. Just like when we do regular graphs, remember we put the name of what we're trying to find or whatever we're trying to fill in a graph on the bottom, and then we work our way up. So the first point I want to point to is 0, 0. So I'll go to 0, point here, and then 0 on my Y, which is here. The 0 should be here. I'm sorry. Let me put it here to make it a little easier to read. So yeah, sorry. So I have 0 on the X, and then I find 0 on the Y. So that's 0, 0. So I'm going to circle that so that you can see it. So whenever I write it out, I put a parentheses mark here. I always put the X first and then the Y. So 0 was the X, then 0 was the Y. That's how I show the location of 0, 0. That's how you write it out. So let's pretend that we're going to find the address of the star family. So the star family lives at 1, 3. So let me write it for you first. So parentheses, 1 is my X, then 3 is my Y. So now I'm going to try to find it. So I start on the X, 1, and then I work my way to go to 3 on the Y. So I go up to 3. Do not go 1 and then 3 because that means you're still on the X. You have to start on the X and then work your way on the Y. So 1, 3 is right here. And so this would be the star family. That's where they live, on 1, 3. So another example, let's pretend we want to find the place where the happy family lives. So I want to go to 4, 2. So I have to start on my X, which is 4, and then I work my way up to the 2 here, and that is where the happy family lives. And then I write it out, 4, always put your X number first, then 2. So parents, in the workbook page, they have examples that they could follow, and they give you points where they can mark it on the graph. If you have any other questions about how to do this, I can make another video for you. So after we complete math, we move on to language. So before I get into the language lesson, I just want to review with students the definitions of all the different parts of speech that we have learned. So the first one is a noun. What is a noun? Okay, so they should have said a noun is the name of a person, place, thing, or idea. Next one is, what is the definition of a verb? So they should have said a verb is a word that does an action, shows a state of being, links two words together, or helps another verb. Next is, what is the definition of a pronoun? So they should have said a pronoun is a word used in the place of a noun. Next question is, what are the articles? They should have said the articles are a, an, and the. Next question, what is an adjective? They should have said an adjective is a word that describes a noun. The next question is, what is an adverb? They should have said an adverb is a word that describes a verb, an adjective, or another verb. Next question, what is an interjection? They should have said an interjection is a word that expresses sudden or strong feeling. And the last one is, what is a contraction? Should have said a contraction is two words put together into one word with some letters left out. So parents, they may struggle with some of them and they may know them all. That is wonderful if they do. But if there are any that they kind of struggle with, in the back of their language book, there's a glossary of the terms and definitions that we have learned. Have them go over that so that they can be able to identify each one and know the difference between each of the different types of parts of speech. So this week, and probably for the remainder of the break that will be off of school, students will be learning prepositions. So there's a whole bunch of list of words that are prepositions. So pretty much every day we'll learn new words, and then on Thursday we'll test on the words that we learned for that week. So if you look at the board, it tells you the definition of a preposition. It says a preposition is a word that shows the relationship of a noun or a pronoun. So today I want to focus mainly on learning the definition before I get into the lesson. I need them to understand what the definition is saying before I start to teach the lesson. So tomorrow's lesson on Tuesday, I will go into prepositions and breaking it down. So you don't have to break down prepositions on today. Today, I really want them to know the definition. Focus on learning the definition, knowing that prepositions are words and that they show something. They show a relationship between a noun and a pronoun. So tomorrow's video, I will actually have a breakdown of the lesson of prepositions. But if you feel like you want to go into it, go ahead. But I am going to have that on tomorrow. So after we complete language, we will move on to social studies. So the last lesson that students talked about was ranchers and how they caught their cattle and how cowboys took care of the cattle. And so that was also our last part of the American West, how the West grew into such a bigger place, how many people left the East to go to the West, especially when the railroad was built as well. So we will move on to chapter 7, which is A New America. So this week's lesson will mainly talk about immigrants and how they left their own country and they came to America. It will talk about the different reasons they came to America as well. And then it will go into songs that were written during that time. They will have to know the information on that song, which is on 134 and 135. So that is this week's social studies lesson. So I'll add to the lesson every week. Tomorrow I'll have something, and then on Wednesday I'll have something. So the test for this is on Friday. After you complete social studies, we move on to science. So we started talking about scientists on last week. The students learned about the scientific method. So they will test on that on Friday. So this week we're going to add to our lesson on scientists, and we'll learn about where scientists work and some of the tools that they use, and also safety during science. So my plan on this week, parents, is on Thursday or Friday. I'm not sure which day yet. Probably in the afternoon around 5. I will send a video that students can participate in, possibly, of science experiments. So I'll send you probably on Tuesday a list of things. Hopefully you have these around the house, or if you want to go to the store, or if not, you could just watch the video of different experiments that I would like to try to do. We were going to do this in class, and I still want to keep it the same so that it can be interactive even at home. So I'll probably send information for that later in the week, and I'll do a video where we could try it all together. So I hope that you all have a good week. This was Monday's lesson. Tomorrow I will send Tuesday's lesson as well.